Does your organisation need more nurses? Struggling to connect with RNs where they spend time? Budgets are tight, there's a scarcity of applicants, and using travellers can cost up to an additional $150,000 per year. It's time for a superior solution. It's time to work with the experts. Like us. Since 2019, healthcare providers throughout the US and Canada have successfully engaged and recruited thousands of candidates using nurse recruitment experts' three-step advertising, screening, and consultative process. We help healthcare providers reach further with their advertising, discover hidden gems, and mobilize the power of their employer brand in nurse recruitment. With results based pricing and no long term commitments, we are the most cost effective and low risk partner for your nurse recruitment needs. So why not take your nurse recruitment to the experts? Visit nurserecruitmentx.com.
Hello everyone, welcome to another Nurse Recruitment Secrets webinar. Today I'm thrilled to have with me Susan Burke from Peace Health, and we're going to be talking about how Susan increased hiring by 41% in 2023 and saved $14 million, which is a lot of money. I hope you saw a cut of that as a form of bonus, Susan.
We wish.
Before we do, I want to share a couple of things, news items over here at Nurse Recruitment Experts. The first is we are really excited to announce that we've teamed up with First Advantage, who are a leading background screen and verification company to help their clients source and hire more nurses. So if you're familiar with First Advantage or you work with First Advantage, you can now take advantage of our partnership. And equally, if you're in the market for a background screener provider, just reach out to us. I'll put the link in the chat where we'll be able to tell you a little bit more about First Advantage and connect you over with them. So really excited about that. First Advantage are a great company, a massive multinational company. That's a good step forward for us here. Secondly, we have launched our own employer brand AI. So we surveyed a bunch of you and wanted to discover what is tricky about reaching nurses these days. And really, most people were saying, well, we just can't get them to apply to our jobs. And in our work as an agency, we realized that's a recurring issue, that whilst hospitals have a lot of employees, they don't really know why nurses come and actually stay. So Jason from our team has put together this really cool automation where all you have to do is input your career site, one of your job descriptions, you link to your homepage of your website, and then you put in your 3 closest competitors. It will tell you what makes you different in your market and how you can stand out in front of nurses. So check that out. We'll put links to both in the chat. So on to today's topic. In early 2023, Susan Burke was handed a goal to help reduce costs by hiring 320 RNs for Oregon-based Peace Health. While she and her team were able to increase their hiring by 41% and save the organization at least $14 million, there was also a number of valuable lessons along the way. So today, Susan and I are going to talk about the tactics she employed and the lessons that were learned, the process of transitioning to a revised goal through business consulting, the impact of internal transfers into and out of locations, full attrition, retention strategies, holistic workforce strategies, where the system is now, and their plans for 2024. So, Susan, could you quickly tell us a little bit more about yourself, and then we'll jump into getting the insight into how you saved so much money for Peace Health.
You bet. Thanks, Adam, for having me today. This will be fun to talk about. It's a good topic. So, of course, my name is Susan Burke. I am currently the Vice President of Talent Acquisition for Peace Health. Peace Health is about a 16,000 caregiver organization located in the Pacific Northwest in the United States. We have 9 hospitals across 3 states, and then, of course, all of the outpatient services that go with that as well. So I've been in talent acquisition, gosh, I'm dating myself, 27 years, I think now. And I've spent almost the last 9 years in healthcare. Prior to that, in high tech, low tech, you name it, anything in between. And I'm sure most of the folks on today's call will realize that we all have transferable skills. And you can pretty much work in any industry and figure out what those challenges are and address them in maybe some of the similar or different ways. So, been in TA a long time for sure.
Yeah, and a day is a long time in TA. It seems at the moment with so many technological innovations, so I'm sure you've seen a lot. So let's jump right into it. How did you first learn about your target to hire 320 RNs in Oregon in 2023?
Yeah, you bet. So that started February of 2023. And like most healthcare organizations, we were looking at what we consider to be mission sustainability. So we are a not for profit, faith based healthcare organization. And like everyone else, we were struggling with our financials. So there were 8 mission sustainability initiatives that were developed. And one of them was to help us to reduce traveler spend, and specifically nursing traveler spend. The Oregon network happened to be the highest user of nursing traveler spend. And so that became our target. So that's where the 320 number came from, was this is what we need to do throughout this year in order to be able to help us to reduce that traveler spend and make things more sustainable. That said, we had hired 223 nurses in the 12 months prior to that, and they were asking us to fill 320 in 5 months. So we knew this was definitely going to be a stretch goal for us.
Wow. Yeah, I think everyone was trying to do the same thing around that time as well, hire more permanent staff. So I'd love to really dig into how you approach that goal and the way you navigated it. So whenever you got it, how confident were you could actually achieve it?
Oh gosh, in all honesty, not that confident initially. What I did know is that we were going to throw everything we had at it. So we knew we were going to build this great strategy. I don't know if we were 100% confident. And as a result of that, we were fully transparent about that. I think, helping people to understand the issues and barriers that, we have a nursing shortage. Everyone knows that. This particular location that we were recruiting for is in Springfield, Eugene, Oregon. So it's in Central Oregon. The location is a regional hospital, which the reason I say that is because it draws patients from a wider geographic area. It's about a 2-hour drive from the Portland metro area in Oregon. So it's not necessarily rural, but it's also not a major metro area. And so what happens when you have a market like that is, yes, you're drawing patients from a wide geography, but you can't necessarily draw those same people who will work from you for that same geographic area. Maybe they're not willing to commute quite that far. And so we had some pressures with housing issues. We certainly had some pressures with local availability. We also knew the time frame was kind of unrealistic. I mean, 5 months, 320 nurses, I don't know, but we're going to do everything we can. And so we really were very clear with them that we had some challenges. And the initial reaction was, we understand, we share the same concerns, and we'll give you a little bit of an extension. So they gave us through the end of October. So we now had 9 months instead of 5 months to fill all of those nursing positions.
Okay. Well, it's good. At least you got the compromise more time, but I think often a lot is asked of talent acquisition to solve problems, but often it's hard to do it without enough money. So how did you go about developing your strategy and securing any additional funding needed?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I guess the good news, bad news is that we were working to reduce traveler spend, and traveler spend is expensive. So trying to help justify ROI suddenly becomes a little easier. So we started, by listing all the things we were already doing, what's already working that maybe we can just expand. And then we listed some of those potential barriers and talked about how do we address some of these barriers. Then we outlined, all the options, everything we could employ, and we literally put them in a spreadsheet and side by side said, okay, here's the strategy. Here's how much this particular strategy might cost us. And then we estimated, and if things go well, here's how many hires we would expect to achieve given this particular strategy. And we did sort of a low, medium, high, estimate of how many hires we thought we might get from each of those strategies. And then we put together that full budget based upon what we thought might work. And in all transparency, the other piece of this is we were really clear that there was no one thing that we felt like if we just did this one thing, it'll fix this problem and we'll hire 320 nurses. We knew it was going to take that full strategy, and it might be a handful here and a handful there, but overall, that's where we would get those dollars, spent and get the reduction that we would see in the traveler spend. So ultimately, it was a little over $1 million investment. It was honestly pretty easy to be able to get the approval for it, knowing that our initial target was, well over 20 million. As you said, we achieved at least a $14 million savings. We'll talk about what we saw along the way and why maybe that number didn't quite match up. But it's not that difficult to justify an investment of that sort when you knew that there was that much potential to be able to influence cost savings.
Okay, so a target like 3,000 per hire was around the target for that million.
Roughly, yeah.
Okay. Before we move on then, so there has been a massive shift, kind of polar opposite to the pandemic period, where everyone was spending big on travel nurses and they were getting paid more, but the agencies that were employing them were getting paid even more. And it seemed like in the space of 6 months, it flipped.
Right.
And I'm just curious to know what powered that. Was it executives at the health system saying, okay, we're not spending money here anymore, or something else?
Yeah, I mean, I think there were a lot of factors that were involved in that. A lot of the health systems, we are some of those that struggle with this. As soon as the vaccine mandate went into place, not everyone was excited about the vaccine mandate. And if you had one like we did, that meant that suddenly you had a number of people that were employed by you that could no longer work for you. And so that is part of what created some of the travelers. Plus, volumes were crazy during COVID. We saw volumes we had never seen before. So there was a really good reason that we needed to bring in travelers. And because everyone needed them at the same time, supply and demand, right? Of course, the cost went up. So what we've seen since then is a lot of the organizations have either reduced or changed their vaccine mandates. A lot of organizations across the country have done that. The science has certainly changed along the way. How we deal with some of this has changed along the way. And then what you also saw is, it was fun to travel for a little while, but a lot of these nurses are deciding, maybe I don't want to travel longer term. Maybe that was fun for a year or two, but now I want to settle down a little bit. So you started to see people come back out of those traveler ranks. That said, I don't know that we will ever get to zero travelers. We were not at zero travelers even before the pandemic started. There is a place for them in your workforce. So when you have, unexpected increases in your demand, or something happens within your workforce that you don't necessarily have all those folks right away. We have a scenario right now that we're using travelers to help train new grads because we don't have enough new grads that are coming in and enough preceptors to train them. And at the same time, we know we have people that are retiring out of the workforce. So there is a place for travelers. But that said, they were super expensive during the pandemic, and those rates have definitely come down. They're more reasonable, but they're still a much higher cost than having FTE staff, on your staff. So let's talk about the other thing that happened as related to that, and that is that the wages for our existing staff also went up. So as a response to what happened during the pandemic and the fact that people could then earn more dollars, we saw that across other industries too. We also have experienced that increase in pay for our caregivers. And unlike a lot of other industries, you cannot just decide to pass that along in the cost of services. So, when in California, they're talking about $25 minimum wages for people who work at McDonald's, you're going to pay more for your Big Mac. It just is the way it is. You can't do that in healthcare. Your reimbursements don't change. How much you're able to actually recoup for those services don't change. So that adds to that pressure of we've got to look at every way that we can to try to save those costs, and reducing traveler spend is one of those.
Yeah, I miss that $1 menu at McDonald's.
Right? Not anymore. Even the dollar store is $1.25 around here. So.
Yeah, before we move on, my view on the travel situation is I think the winners from it were the staff nurses actually, because
Mhm.
you had nurses that were doing travel before COVID and they were happy and content, and then they had a couple of years of great rates, great pay, and more people got into it to the point where right now health systems realized they can't spend that much,
Mhm. That's right.
and there's almost like in some sections an oversupply of people want to do travel nursing, so the rates going down. But for staff nurses, because facilities kind of got used to paying more for a nurse, wages have gone up. So it's been a topsy-turvy roller coaster time
Mhm. It
in that
has.
space. So interesting to see where it goes in the future. Let's go back to Peace Health,
Yeah.
talk strategy and tactics. So could you talk us through exactly what did you do to get more hires first?
You bet. All right, buckle your seatbelts because now we're going to talk some of these fun details and some
And what was
specifics. So,
successful, by the way, and what wasn't?
yeah, I'll give you some of that too. So, I mean, first of all, let me be very clear that this is a team effort. So, yes, I helped to build some of the strategy. I did not do that alone. I likely even have some of my own team members that have joined us today on the webinar, and I invite them to chime in if there are things that I miss along the way. But I could not have done this without this amazing team. So, I want to be really clear that this involved the recruiting team, the sourcing team, our marketing, our TA leadership, partnering with our local leaders, the chief nursing officer. I mean, we really had to have everyone all hands on deck. And as I mentioned earlier, we knew it was highly likely that no one thing was going to help solve this. And so it really had to be a comprehensive strategy. So first thing we did, okay, supply and demand, right? Now, demand just went up for recruiting services in the Oregon network. So the first thing we did was shift one of our recruiters from the rest of the team to also help support the Oregon network team. We also dedicated one of our sourcers to focus exclusively on the work as well. So the part of it was just shifting resources, not new resources, but shifting resources. Then, as I mentioned, we did an existing strategy evaluation. So we looked at, what's already working, where might we increase focus or spend. So a good example of that is employee referrals. Employee referrals are about a third-ish of our total hiring population on an annualized basis. And so that's working well. How can we capitalize on that and help to, engage them in referring more folks? And so we'll talk about that a little bit, about how we increased employee referrals as well. And then we, as I mentioned, we engaged then our caregivers in that. So we talked about the referrals, but we also initiated an internal how you can help campaign. And so in Oregon during the pandemic, so to your point of the pandemic had some interesting challenges, we experienced quite a bit of issues around housing. And so one of the things that the organization did then was they created a centralized housing hotline. So there was a database and a phone number that both people from the community as well as our own caregivers could report, hey, I have a house available for rent or for sale. And so you had access to that. So we reminded our internal folks, hey, don't forget this still exists. So if you know of housing, please let us know. Here's how to do that. We also encourage them to help us to convert travelers. So one of the ways that you can help with your staffing is convert some of the folks that are helping you now. So we gave them some ideas on how they could help us to convert some of those folks to FTEs. We also encourage them to write positive online reviews. So of course, the more you see from a nurse, not from a recruiter, about how good it is to work in a place, the more likely it is that you will consider working there. And then we also asked them to serve as school ambassadors. So knowing we had some, limited cohort sizes, the pandemic was not kind to nursing education opportunities either. Knowing that, we asked some of those folks, can you serve as an ambassador to your alma mater? So if you graduated from a school that is not in our local area, can you help connect us? And can you help us to maybe recruit other students who might be willing to move here, knowing you had kind of a similar experience? So we did all of that, and we provided some dollars for departments that convert travelers to celebrate that. So we gave them an incentive, like, hey, if you convert one, we'll let you figure out how you want to celebrate. One team, I think they converted 4 travelers, and they all ordered jackets for themselves. Another team, I think, did the standard pizza party, but we gave them some incentive to try to help us with that. And then we also asked our current staff members to connect with former employees. So you've heard this referred to as a boomerang campaign. A lot of people talk about that. We asked those folks to connect with former caregivers instead of just the recruiters. They're more likely to respond to someone they know, someone that can say, hey, we miss you, come back. And so we engaged them in that work too. So we used our own workforce to then help us to fill some of these positions. Okay, then process improvement, big one for us. So we recognized speed to hire, absolutely critical. So for a number of those positions, we centralized the interview and decision-making process. So it was no longer one person might interview with multiple departments. It was no, that person interviews with a centralized team who makes a hiring decision on behalf of that department. Little change management going on there. Not everyone loves that model. They like to make their own hiring decisions. And yet that wasn't really a luxury that we had. We had to get to speed to hire. So then we got into marketing, advertising, and direct sourcing. So one thing we noticed pretty quickly, we did not have a nursing specific landing page. Other organizations do. We did not at that time. So we worked with our Marcom team and we built our own nursing specific landing page that included current nursing leaders, current RNs, and our chief nursing officer or CNO. And related to that, we created nursing videos that spotlighted both the hospital and the location. Like, what's cool about living in Springfield and working at Riverbend Hospital? And then what's cool about the environment that we have as a culture within our organization? So that was mostly nurses and nursing leaders and gave us that opportunity to tell our story in maybe a little bit of a different way. Related to that, we created one-page flyers that highlight what's awesome about being a nurse at Peace Health in Oregon. So we could use them anywhere we wanted to. You could post them somewhere, you could put them online. We used them all over the place. And then we did local and national nursing association publication, display ads, and online ads. Our TA marketing person, who's pretty phenomenal, came up with the idea of running an advertorial in the statewide Oregon State Board of Nursing online newsletter. So the advertorial was titled Top 5 Reasons Nurses Are Moving to Eugene, which of course we were hoping to attract some in-state movement. And we got a lot of traction out of that one. And then we started a national advertising campaign using an external partner. So we used a Google ad campaign, Facebook, Instagram, a number of other things. I'll talk in a moment about what we learned about that. We did targeted Indeed campaigns for new grads and experienced nurses. We also geofenced our competitors. I'm sure they're doing it to us too. So if you are a nurse and you're on your break and you're searching your phone, you might just see an ad from us that says, hey, we're hiring, come talk to us about these opportunities. And then marketing used our own applicant tracking system and our CRM databases. We used licensure lists, attendee lists, you name it, we did it. Okay, and we're not done yet. In terms of addressing local nursing shortages, we also did a national residency program call. So most healthcare organizations have kind of their local, student programs that they work with. We hire most of the people out of the college that's right there in our local community, and yet there aren't enough for us to be able to hire the number that we really needed. So we decided to do a national call and recorded it so it would be available at any time. Honestly, somewhat well attended, not a lot of traction out of that. We'll talk about why in a minute. But we did include our nursing leader, recruiter, and several others on that call, and it is available on demand, so it became part of our collateral, which is great. And then we also added externally posted fellowship opportunities. So one of the reasons that we sometimes don't see people that are, either new grads or experienced nurses that want to come on board is because the specialty area that they want to work in is not available. And so they will go somewhere where it is. So opening fellowship opportunities gives us that opportunity to bring in someone who's maybe a med-surg nurse, wants to work in ICU, wants to work in labor and delivery. And so we have been expanding our fellowship opportunities to offer those as well. And then, of course, we had to increase the external partnerships and all of the support related to that. So we brought in some contingent direct placement agencies. We brought in a new sourcing partner to come work with us. You might know who that partner was. We developed a new relationship with a nursing recruitment vendor where we paid a flat fee to hire up to 25 people, which then helped lower our cost per hire. But it also came with an indefinite time frame. So while you want to hire 25, might take you a year or two to get there, might be right away. We didn't know. It was a new strategy that we were trying. And then in terms of addressing those housing shortages, we implemented a full relocation package. To date, we were only using lump sum relocations. We then instead also added a full relocation package, which came with the full support. So someone would help you coordinate the move. They'll bring in a household goods move vendor. They'll help you identify housing. All of those things became available to those nurses. And we also added, even when we were still using lump sums for some positions, that ability to help connect them with a household goods mover or to help them to identify housing in the area. So that was another way we addressed some of those housing issues. And then longer term, we added international nurse recruitment. That's an 18 to 24 month minimum further out strategy, but it was part of the conversation that happened as a part of all of this.
Yeah.
And then I would just say, kind of lastly, the thing that we did was work on weekly progress meetings. So accountability became key. So, for the most part, that was something that really just kept us, on track and really focused. Okay, so that's a lot. What did we find? Right? That's what you
Can I
want to
just
know.
jump in and ask?
Yes, of course. Please do.
Well, first of all, I love a few things about this. I'm impressed how you covered so many bases and there wasn't a sense of overwhelm and you didn't become misguided. You were able to realize what worked and what didn't and funnel
Right.
more energy into it. And I also like the fact that the system said, here's the goal, here's the money, and then give you and your team the freedom and the funding to go out
Absolutely.
and make it happen. Because in a lot of hospitals, it's just like an ongoing slog where you need to hire more nurses, But you had the number you needed, you had the data, and then you had the budget. So I suppose that helped you focus. And
Absolutely. And I think the important caveat to that is also the freedom to fail. So a lot of organizations will say, I only want to invest the dollars if there's a guaranteed return. And we were trying things we had never tried before. We were trying things that were new to the market. We were trying things that were just new strategies to us. And so we had that ability to say, this might not work. And we've spent some dollars on it and it might not work. And we had to be okay with that. We had to know we're going to monitor results and we're going to shift quickly if we need to, but we need the ability to just try some things that are unproven.
Mm-hmm. Could we talk a little bit about what were your top 3 methods? Like not necessarily in terms of quantity, but in terms of value for money, and then maybe some which you wouldn't recommend without naming names.
You bet. So I think, the top strategy for us was engaging our own caregivers. So if we're going to try to help solve the staffing issue, who better than people that are doing this work every day and are impacted by that? So certainly we saw caregiver referrals go up. We certainly saw traveler conversions. We had 36 traveler conversions that helped with this goal that we were working on. That's a lot. And we could not have done that. TA doesn't do the traveler conversions. It's really the department they're working in that is saying, hey, have you thought about staying? It's their leader saying, have you thought about staying? And so that really was a big part of that strategy. The other thing that really helped us was those external fellowships. We hired 18 fellows, so that was really new. Maybe what I would say, well, and ROI on both of those are great, right? There's not a whole lot of expense in either one of those. The things that maybe were not as successful for us. So the external support that we got in terms of sourcing and then contingent placement, it wasn't completely unfruitful. We actually hired 9 people through contingent staffing vendors. So it's not like it was completely a waste of dollars or any of that. The challenge is they're doing all the same things we were. So when I listed that full list, it's a pretty comprehensive strategy. Everyone else is trying the same thing. And so had we been an organization that did not have our own sourcing and did not have a plan, we probably would have experienced quite a bit more great result from that. But because we were already doing the work ourselves, it just wasn't nearly as fruitful. And the other thing I would say that wasn't quite as fruitful as you would want it to be, and I think we knew this right up front, but we were feeling some of that pressure that we just really have to go try this, is the national advertising campaign. Let's be real. We are the amazing, awesome Peace Health organization that part of our charm is that we are a bit smaller of an organization. We are more nimble. We can do some great things. We have really great culture. But we're not a nationally known name brand. People are not moving to the Pacific Northwest because of Peace Health. They're moving to the Pacific Northwest because they have a connection here, because they love the outdoors, because there's really cool stuff happening up here. Oh, and they're in healthcare and they want to come work for Peace Health. So national ad campaigns aren't necessarily the most fruitful for us. I'm sure a lot of the folks that are on the call can relate to the, oh, well, look, you're in Alaska, Oregon, and Washington, and they're generally in the top 5 for nursing pay rates across the country. So you should recruit out of all the other states that are lower. Yes, and so is our cost of living. So it doesn't really help you to do national advertising. And yet we had some really good lessons learned. We saw our clicks changed a little bit from the states they were coming from. We now know which states we might want to target more, but it becomes more of the, all right, we tried that. We have some great lessons learned, and now we can take those lessons and maybe tweak the national advertising that we do moving forward.
Yeah, I love how you find a lesson, even if it didn't work out. That was learning for us, I think, over the past couple of years. We had that belief where there's a whole country of nurses out there, so if you're in a great location, it should be easy to get them
Right.
to move. But we've kind of switched to more focus on people that are moving for other reasons already, and where can you find them? So I'd like to learn a little bit more about the revision of the goal. We spoke about
Yeah.
how this goal kept you focused and on track, but you told me prior to this conversation that it was revised and altered along the way. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So when you are handed a goal like we were, the initial question was, where did the 320 number come from? And honestly, we couldn't get an answer to that. We knew it was part of the mission sustainability initiatives. We knew it was going to help us to save travelers, but we couldn't quite get our arms around what exactly does this number mean? And what we discovered, after asking the question multiple times, is what had happened was they took the number of travelers that we had in January and they added a national first year turnover rate to that number and said, this is your number. That's where 320 came from. A couple challenges with that. One major one, there was no factoring of attrition on the existing workforce. So we had over 1,500 nurses that were already working there. You're going to have some attrition. It's just the way that goes. There was no accounting for any of that. There also was confusion about, does 320 mean heads or FTE? Because TA speaks in heads. I can hire you a person to work 0.9, but I can't hire you 0.9 of a person. It doesn't work that way. And the operations side of the house typically speaks in FTE. So there was a disconnect. Does it really mean FTE or does it really mean headcount? We're not really sure. And so what we discovered through all of that is that what they really meant was they wanted us to hire a specific number that was a net new, and we were not going to get to that number using the 320 math that we had kind of come up with to that date. And the other piece of that was we didn't really know what fully staffed meant. So if we hired you 320 nurses, would you be fully staffed? Wait, what does that mean? Does that mean all beds open and available all the time? What does that mean? And so we really had a lot of confusion about, what exactly is this goal? Based on the initial math, it just didn't look like that was really the true north for where we needed to be. Bless you.
The silent. The podcast listeners won't know I just sneezed. So I think, that it's so good that you brought like the real life kind of insight on why it should be changed.
Right.
And how did the alteration help the team refocus, and did that change morale, or what was the real life effect of altering that goal?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we really had to get very clear about that. And so, I asked a number of questions. I raised concerns with our network chief nursing officer, with the system chief nursing officer, with our chief human resources officer. Even I think our chief administrative officer was involved. So was our chief operations officer. So this was at like kind of highest levels in terms of, do we really have the right goal? And so as we worked with them to evaluate that goal, our network CNO, with assistance from our chief financial officer, pulled together this spreadsheet that really defined for us what does fully staffed mean by department for inpatient nurses. And fully staffed was then informed by our average daily census, which then informs our fiscal year 24 budget. So it is now, budget focused, it is average daily census focused, and it really doesn't necessarily mean all beds open all the time, because it really is based on your average daily census. And then what they did was they factored in our standard non-productive time. So, everyone has some non-productive time. You're taking vacation, you're out on leave, you're in orientation. Those are considered non-productive. They added in that kind of average factor. They added in their average attrition. So their actual average attrition, which by the way is much lower than the national average. So that's also important for us to know. And ultimately what they did was they established if we are fully staffed, this is how much we need in terms of FTE. And that number minus our current FTE, not including travelers, just the people that we currently employ, led to a new goal of 171.77 FTE, which was the gap. That was the delta. And it was now speaking in terms of FTE and not in terms of headcount. So that gave us this new, North Star to focus on. And also, really cool thing, it gave me the ability to snapshot at any given point in time. So we can be hiring people, but we can also be, of course, losing folks. And we weren't previously capturing internal transfers into or out of that particular hospital. We were only capturing external terms. So if someone transferred out of the hospital or someone transferred in, we couldn't capture that. Now we had all of that in one full picture, and we had the ability to say, okay, our North Star is 171.77. We can see at any given time how far we are from that, no matter what happens in the workforce. And so that's really how we got there. And I should also mention the other piece of that that's really important. Instead of just being a recruitment problem, because too often in TA, this is what we're told is like, if you could just fill all my openings, it'd all be good. Would it though? Because how many people did I hire in and how many did you then lose? And so it's that, the leaky bathtub analogy, right? So it really then shifted the conversation into what are our retention strategies? How do we also keep these folks engaged and on board? And so it really became a comprehensive view of a workforce strategy instead of really what it originally was, which was just a recruitment strategy.
Yes, we had a couple of requests beforehand to talk about retention. But before we do, that's such a huge shift, isn't it? 320 to around 170. If you could go back, what would you have done differently to try and set a more realistic target earlier?
I mean, retrospect, right? At the beginning of all this, I was in an interim vice president role, and I, in the middle of this process, moved into the vice president role as a full-time job. Looking back, I think I would have been more forceful, maybe, about really asking that question about where that number came from, because I think if we'd had it at the beginning, that would have helped shift the conversation, and it wouldn't have been quite as much recruitment focused. It would have been more holistic. Knowing that now, that's how I approach every conversation moving forward. So it is about lessons learned. Right.
Yeah. Let's move on to retention then. So 2023 saw a big shift focus towards retention. Could you tell us about some of the strategies that Peace Health employed to keep staff?
Yeah, you bet. You bet. So again, I will give credit to our chief nursing officer for this one, because this is really, her wheelhouse. We had some influence on this, but I'll tell you, this is what she built in. So first off, we are a union represented workforce there. And so we had an outstanding nursing contract that was not yet finalized. So it was number one on her list to finalize that nursing union contract, which they did. She also has on her list to ensure highly reliable operational structures to support daily, safe, predictable staffing environment. They worked on implementing caregiver wellness strategies, including decreasing workplace violence, which they were recently recognized for, mental health resources. We've all talked about this has been a lot of stress and a lot of pressure on our healthcare resources. So making sure they had access to mental health resources, supporting work-life balance, and overall meeting caregivers where they are. So being more gracious, really trying to help support them in whatever they needed. She has been working to strengthen their professional governance structure at all levels, to implement evidence-based practice transition programs where applicable, to finalize and implement their nurse leader development and engagement plan, which included their nurse leader workload and compensation, and to continue to develop and implement their Oregon Network Institute for Nursing Excellence. So really about engagement, about growth, career opportunities, continuing to develop our folks, and then really helping to support them in whatever they might need to be successful and to feel like this is their home.
That's the important word, isn't it? Home.
It is.
You have
It
to
is.
create an environment that people want to keep coming back to and
That is
don't
right.
feel like they want to run away from every day.
That's
So
right.
I love the mental health piece of that as well, because a lot of people's connection and relationship with the workplace is based on emotions
Yeah.
and feelings, and it's so crucial that health systems can recognize that and work towards boosting people's
Right.
morale and their comfort
That's right.
in the workplace. So yeah, I can see why you're so successful in this, because you've really thought about what nurses want and responded. Could we talk about holistic workforce strategy? So I think I know what that means, but I haven't used this phrase before, and there's probably a few people on the same level. So could you tell me what that means and how you
Yeah.
implement it?
Well, I'll tell you what I think it means. How's that? It might mean something different for others, but for me, what it really means is meeting the workforce where they are. So you heard that as part of her retention strategy as well. So I'll give you some examples. If you have a high number of nurses that you know are reaching retirement age, what can you do to keep them engaged longer? So instead of retiring and separating from the organization, maybe they don't want to work, 4 10s anymore, 4 12s, 3 12s, whatever their schedule is. But maybe they're willing to pick up a 4-hour shift here or there. Can you design 4-hour shifts that are available to them? Can you think about utilizing them in virtual nursing rather than in direct bedside nursing where they are, caring for patients physically every day? So we're thinking about how do you restructure the work in a different way that helps you to staff it differently. We've had a lot of conversations recently about gig work, whether that's internal, whether it's external. Can you just pick up a shift when we need to cover a shift? Could you be working for another healthcare organization and pick up a shift here? So there are some conversations happening around, how do we do that? Care team models and evaluation of their staffing ratios to make sure that we are ensuring both safe and reliable patient care, that we also have strong, caregiver experience that's coming out of that. So they're feeling well supported. I mentioned virtual nursing and virtual nursing support. A lot of folks are starting to really use that. AI might be a part of that. We don't do a ton of that yet, but we're exploring it. Increasing those nursing cohort sizes and creating ways to successfully hire and retain more new grads is a part of that. So we have a higher new grad goal in the Oregon network than we've had in past years. That also means you have to have the folks that are available to train them. You have to be careful about not over hiring into your night shift, where now it feels like the night shift is unsafe because too many people are new grads. So you have to structure the work so that you have the right folks to be able to help support them and to get them fully up to speed. And then supplementing our staffing via international recruitment strategies, as I mentioned earlier, is also part of this conversation. So if there is a nursing shortage in the US, which there is everywhere you are, and we know there are still some countries that surprisingly have some nursing surplus and they would like to move here, that needs to be a part of your strategy, even if that's more long term. So it really is about how you holistically look at your workforce solutions and think about how you deliver the work maybe in a different way that helps us to potentially staff in a different way. It might mean I have more heads on board to deliver the same number of FTE, but then I still have the ability to deliver that care that I need to in my workforce. So that's my definition. I'm sure there are other definitions.
So the way I see it is looking at the workforce as a whole and how they can interact with each other and how people can fill different compartments and not
Right.
being so rigid about how you're actually going to get people to do the work. And I was at the CGFNS office in Philly a couple of weeks ago, and they're in charge of credentialing international nurses. And Mukul, who's the director of global affairs there, was giving me a tour, and he showed me the mail room, and it was massive. Like, I was shocked that even though there's kind of a pause on processing new visas, it's the quantity of staff that they have there and
Yeah.
incoming requests and the number of nurses internationally. I think even a few people have commented on this live who want to come to the US. So it's great that you're pipelining that for whenever it's a more kind of open flow of nurses.
Yeah, and it's an interesting challenge too, because we don't require bachelor's degrees for all of our nurses. As a result of that, we don't qualify to do H-1B visas for these folks. And so that does mean we have to wait for their permanent resident or green card to come through. So that's why it's 18 to 24 months for us, where some others might be able to do that differently. And that's an interesting two-edged sword, because then if you were to require a bachelor's degree for all of your nurses, now you've also then made it more difficult to fill some of those positions in the US. So it's kind of an interesting challenge.
Yeah, on that note, well, we have a question here from Vishal, who is curious on he says relying on third-party agencies for outsourcing or using them. What are your thoughts on offshore agencies? So using, for example, a BPO in the Philippines or India. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think depending upon the work that you are doing and what you are looking to outsource, that can be a very viable option. I think for us and the way that we are structured, where we might use that more is on the sourcing side. So help us to find some people we haven't talked to yet might be a really good option for something like that. We tend to really rely on the personal touch. So our recruiters talk to every person, who is qualified. They're going to screen every candidate, and they're going to create that relationship where if this particular position isn't the right one for you, I might have 3 others. Or if now isn't the right timing, I'm going to be in touch with you for the next 6 months until we find the right fit for you. So we do a lot of that very personal touch, where sometimes you want those people to be on your own staff so they can also say, well, my personal experience working for Peace Health is not necessarily a third party. But I think they absolutely have their place. I think, we could look at something like that. We haven't thus far, but there certainly is that opportunity.
Okay, thank you. We work with many recruiters in the Philippines, find them to be great.
Yes.
So there's certainly a place, I think, for that in strategy.
Absolutely, I would agree. And you could also decide that you're going to carve out a piece of this. So in this case, this particular project would have not been something I would have handed to someone. But I could say, well, we have a need in this area, and I'm just going to hand you all of this work and let them manage the entire work. So there are lots of options when it comes to, RPO or BPO.
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Vishal.
Yeah.
So to close off, here we are in February 2024. I remember it was not February, but I remember in 2009, I was 12, and I was like, oh, it's going to be the 2010s. Like, what does that mean? That's such a big number, and I didn't think I was going to live to this age. I would only really eat chicken nuggets and little potato waffles when I was a kid. But it's time moves on, and it's great to kind of look back to how you're doing now compared to February 2023, and then look ahead to the next 12 months. So let's look back first. How are you doing compared to last year?
Yeah, you bet. So as you mentioned, in the intro, we did increase by 41%. So we went from our average monthly hires of 18.58 to 26.22. So that's where we get that increase of 41%. We did not hit the 320 goal. I know you're probably stumped. Wait, what? She did all this stuff and didn't hit 320. No, and we knew that was probably going to be a stretch. We actually achieved 266 of the 320. So it was 83% of our goal. That's why you see the $14 million cost savings. it was dramatic. Also, there are more cost savings than that because we also reduced some of our traveler rates. There are lots of other things that we did to help that, but TA's portion is about $14 million. But here's the good news. The gap of 171.77 that was identified back in August of 2023, our current gap to close is 44.64. So we went from 171.77 to 44.64, which is super ridiculously impressive. Okay, but it's not all TA. So if you pay attention to Peace Health in the news, we did close a hospital that was within 6 miles of the hospital that we were staffing for. And it's something we probably should have done a long time ago, and we finally did. So a number of those nurses that were working at that hospital, which was not a full service hospital, it was not a fully running operational hospital, moved over to the Riverbend Hospital. So a number of those were transfers that moved over. And then we also did, quite a bit, as I mentioned previously, of converting of travelers. I mean, there were a lot of other reasons why it wasn't just the talent acquisition strategy that helped that. And while we do still have travelers at this hospital, we have reduced our traveler reliance by over 80% since we started this. So that's back to that. Now we have a North Star. I know exactly where I stand at any given moment. Some of the nurses that moved over from the hospital we closed, moved over with full intent, like this is going to be good for me, and then maybe decide that's not the right fit for them. And so that number, that 44.64, will ebb and flow a little bit. It'll probably go up a little bit and then come back down a little bit, but we know at any given point of time, where do I need to be to help close this? So that's our results. So I'm super proud of this team. We didn't hit 320, but man, did we make a huge difference. And I mean, $14 million is nothing to sneeze at. So it's really good results.
That's about 50,000 per extra hire that you made. And
Easily,
I think that's a great case study for any leader in HR, talent acquisition, who wants to lobby for more budget, to say that Peace Health saved 50,000 per hire they made.
Yeah.
Give me a hand here. So congratulations on that, and to your team too. What have you got in store for this year?
Yeah. Great question. So moving forward, of course, now the focus is really on workforce productivity. So now we're looking at, we're closing the FTE gap, but we're also focused now on reducing premium pay. We're looking at how often we use overtime pay. We're looking at productivity targets. We have some new laws going into effect in several of our states on staffing ratios, which incidentally, in most cases, actually helps us. So that tells you that we've been doing a really good job on our per patient ratios. And really just looking at being adequately staffed, of course, for that best patient care. So now we have a new target. Like, nursing's not solved. So don't hear me say like, oh, we solved that problem, moving on to the next one. That's not true. So we are still working on nursing. That is going to be something we are working on, indefinitely. We will continue to look at our strategies. We'll continue to adjust them, try new things. We've got to do that. But our next target now is taking all of those lessons learned and working on our travelers in our tech roles. So surge techs, diagnostic imaging, our rad tech usage of travelers is pretty heavy right now. They're very difficult to find. We don't have any local programs, so we've got some challenges on how we fill those. And what's funny about that is I was talking with one of my TA leaders yesterday, and he was saying, this doesn't feel like this is like a big issue for us. Okay, relatively, compared to the 320 plan and the nursing shortage that we had in Oregon that we have now made huge strides on, you're right, it's not a big issue. But that's what most health systems are now facing. We have pulled all of the big levers. Now it's about the little ones. So it's a little bit like, our whole recruitment strategy said we'll get 5 here and 2 here and 1 here, and eventually we'll get 320. It's kind of the same idea. So we have to be able to save those dollars and make ourselves more sustainable for the long haul so we can continue to deliver that great service to our patients and our communities. And so now it becomes about, what are the little levers that you can pull? Well, you can get rid of 10 here and 5 here and 2 here, but ultimately we're going to save millions of dollars. And so that's really what has shifted for us in fiscal year 24, is now it is really about some of those smaller numbers. So both of those things really help us to support our existing caregivers, reduce our overall cost, and then stabilize that workforce so that we are here to deliver services in our communities, for the next 100 years. So it's a constantly evolving process, but that's what's on our plate for fiscal year 24 and beyond.
Okay. And those little problems can become big problems if they're not dealt with.
That's
So
right. That's right.
I'm happy with that. So that really draws us to the end. I think there's a lot of insights, learnings, and actionable takeaways from this. So if you enjoyed the discussion this season, leave a comment or reach out to Susan on LinkedIn if that's okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, you bet.
Yeah. And if you'd like to learn more about what we do here at Nurse Recruitment Experts, just visit our website, Nurse Recruitment X, or check out my LinkedIn. Adam Chambers is the name. So thank you so much, Susan. I'd love to do a follow-up in 1 year or so to see how you get on with your
Yeah.
further changes. Until then, all the best, and thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thanks, Adam.
Bye.
Appreciate it.